Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King. And in this episode, I want to talk just briefly about one of the greatest comic book artists of all time, the undisputed master of the romance genre, Matt Baker. This has been an interesting month. I think that's an understatement. Between the protests over the death of George Floyd and the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of the protests that we've been seeing. Also, this has been Pride Month, and this previous Saturday was the 51st anniversary of the Stonewall riots. Both of those things have got me thinking about doing this video about Matt Baker. Of course, people know Matt Baker. They know him because he's the best and greatest and most acclaimed and most successful and collected romance artist in the history of comics, one of the top talents to ever grace the comic book medium. He was also a black man, and he was also gay. So a lot of people don't know a lot about Matt Baker's personal life, and my understanding from the reading I've done is that he kept things very private at the time. In the 40s and 50s, when he was in the industry, from what I've heard, he didn't have very many close friends. He had a lot of acquaintances, but very few people knew him well. They knew him as a very good-looking man who was always very well composed, very dapper, very snappy dresser. And as a result, there was a lot of speculation about him being sort of a ladies' man. There were people saying, he couldn't possibly have been able to draw women that well unless he knew personally exactly what they look like, wink, wink. And there was, talk about him sort of as a man on the town and how he I think there was a quote that he never got married because he figured instead of making one woman miserable, why not make many women happy? But after he passed away, his few very close friends and some of his family members revealed to members of the comic media that, in fact, Matt Baker was gay. He was a member of the LGBTQ community. In addition to being arguably the most prominent and most important African-American artists, certainly in the golden age of comics. You could make an argument that he's been sort of the most important and influential African-American comic book artists to date so far. So I just wanted to sort of mention at this time, just the work of the great Matt Baker. Unfortunately, he was born with a congenital heart defect. That did mean that during World War II, he was declared unfit for service. So he instead had to stay home during the war, and he got his first jobs working in comics during the war when a lot of other artists were off and the comic industry needed new people. The legend goes that he walked into the shop of Bob Iger with one sample. It was just one drawing that he had done of a woman, and the drawing was so beautiful that they immediately hired him on the spot as a comic artist. It wasn't until several years later, of course, that the romance, this is in, I think, 44, the romance genre didn't really start until 47 and take off, and when he really found his place was at St. John's, where he did some amazing covers and amazing interior artwork and was sort of their top #1 artist. And those issues at St. John's go for amazing amounts of money. They're in huge demand. Everybody wants to get these awesome Matt Baker covers. He has a couple other claims to fame. He was a co-creator of arguably the first black hero in comics, which was a sort of Tarzan-esque jungle lord character named Vuda. And in his first couple appearances, the character was African, was black. And then the editors changed him into a white guy after the fact in later issues. He also was the artist on what many historians consider to be the first real graphic novel. It's called It Rhymes with Lust, and it's sort of this crime noir. I think it came out in 1951. It was St. John put that out. He then did a second graphic novel after that, and this is 25 years before graphic novels really started becoming a thing in the mainstream. So in his later work, he ended up, after pre-code, his work isn't quite as exciting. The code definitely tamped down what he was able to do. He started working with Vince Coletta's studio, and that led to a lot of other people inking his work and sort of tamping down his artwork. It did elevate a lot of the work from Vince Coletta and other people. You can see a lot of influences of Matt Baker. So it's got its pros and cons. He did a lot of romance work in the late 50s for Atlas. If you're looking for a Matt Baker book for your collection, I think the place to really look if you want a romance book is at the Atlas books. Because he, for whatever crazy reason, Stan Lee was not having him do the covers, even though they had like the greatest romance artist and cover artist of all time working for them. He wasn't doing the covers. He had a hand, I think, in some of Vince Coletta's covers, but he was doing the interior work. He has a very distinctive style. Once you see his work a little bit, you can immediately recognize his pencils. And so some of those books, because he's not on the cover, there's a lot of those late Atlas books from 57, 58, 59, where he's done interior work, and it's not really noted. People don't really know as much about it, and you can still get some good deals on those occasionally. I just got one a little while ago for like $15 that ended up trading away. The other thing, I'll show just the one book that I recently got in the trade with Kyle. Thanks very much, Kyle. You'll be seeing this in one of my haul videos later. This is post-code in the period when he was drawing for quality between St. John's and Atlas. This is one of his covers. It's not quite as dynamic as his pre-code covers, but it's still really nice. So I'm really happy to have this in my collection. The other option, if you don't want to spend hundreds of dollars and you don't want to go, diving into the romance stuff, is this is very atypical, but you can still get these really cheap. It's Lassie. He actually did 3 issues of Lassie. He clearly didn't do the cover. They have all these painted covers with Lassie, so it can be hard to tell sometimes, but if you can see the back cover, it's very clearly, even though there's a lot of animals and stuff, it's very clearly Matt Baker's work. And he actually did the art for almost the entire issue here. I think he worked on 3 issues, 19, 20, and 21. I paid $5 for this. At some point, these are going to break out because his work is so in such high demand. People who know are seeking out this sort of stuff now. But if you want to get something from Matt Baker, those would be your best options. There's sort of a scaled down, hierarchy. Once you get past the St. John's, you've got the quality work, then you got the Atlas work, then you've got a few rando things like these Lassie books. Unfortunately, again, I mentioned he had that heart defect. He ended up having heart issues his whole life, and he died of a heart attack when he was just 39 years old while he was still drawing for Atlas in 1959. The last of his works was published in, I think cover dated was like January 1960. It's interesting to speculate what might have been different about both his career and the creation of the Marvel Universe if he had lived just a couple more years to participate in the creation of the Marvel Universe, and see if he did any superhero work, that sort of thing with Marvel. It's just one of those big unknowns. But anyway, that's just a little video I wanted to do, just talk about Matt Baker, his incredible legacy. I think it's important in times like this to note, people like Matt Baker, whose art has brought joy to so many, like hundreds of thousands of people and comic fans for decades, and just acknowledge that yes, this was a black man, it was a gay man doing these works. I read a thing just recently when I was doing a little bit of research on Matt Baker that made a point about how ironic it was that he became famous in the 1950s for drawing these beautiful white women at a time where he could have been arrested or even murdered if he actually talked to beautiful white women out in public. So I think it's important to just recognize creators like Matt Baker, not just for the amazing work that they did, but for who they were. So thanks very much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any comments, please feel free to comment down in the section below. Let's try and keep it civil. I don't want this to turn political. I also have a thing here you can subscribe to. I got a couple other videos. I'm going to have another video coming in a couple days where we celebrate the 4th of July, and I've got some bicentennial comics that I'll be looking at for the 4th of July. So I'll see you in just a couple days. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you then.